Ladies and gentlemen, if you are enjoying my videos, please click the like button. It is the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. Blackout Horror. They won't let you leave. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. Disoriented Dawn. A damp, metallic tang filled Sarah's nostrils as she awoke. Disoriented, she blinked against the harsh fluorescent glare that seemed to emanate directly from the featureless white ceiling. Her head throbbed, a dull ache punctuated by insistent pinpricks behind her eyes. Panic clawed at her throat as she sat up, the cheap plastic chair groaning under her weight. Where was she? The room, a sterile conference room devoid of personality, offered no answers. 5 other figures stirred around the table, each shrouded in an unsettling silence. A man with haunted eyes, his face pale and drawn, cradled his head in his hands. A young woman, vibrant purple hair matted and dull, stared at a phone screen that displayed nothing but static. Opposite her, a hulking figure with a military buzz cut remained frozen, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles shone white. In the corner, huddled in a ball, a man with owlish glasses whimpered softly. None of them remembered. Not their names, not how they arrived in this sterile nightmare. No wallets, no phones, just the gnawing emptiness where memories should reside. The only decoration in this sterile tomb was a single, mocking poster. A team of smiling stick figures celebrating under the cheery slogan "Teamwork makes the dream work." A deep, chilling voice boomed from hidden speakers, its synthetic tones devoid of any human warmth. It seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome, participants," it announced, the words echoing eerily in the stark room. "You have been selected to participate in a groundbreaking social experiment designed to test the limits of human cooperation." A collective gasp ripped through the room. The haunted-eyed man lurched forward, his voice hoarse. "Experiment? What experiment? Where the hell are we?" he demanded, his words a desperate plea swallowed by the suffocating silence. The disembodied voice ignored him, continuing its chilling monologue. "The doors are locked. All communication devices have been deactivated. Consider this a controlled environment." A pause followed, heavy with unspoken threat. "Your task is simple. Complete a series of challenges. Success will be rewarded. Failure," the voice trailed off, the silence thicker than molasses, leaving a void of dread hanging in the air. Sweat trickled down Sarah's spine. Trapped, absolutely trapped. A primal fear coiled in her gut, squeezing the air from her lungs. She stole glances at the others. Haunted terror mirrored her own in their eyes. The young woman slammed her phone on the table, the plastic shattering with a sound like breaking bones. "This is some messed up prank, right?" she spat, her voice brittle with forced bravado. But the tremor in her hands betrayed her facade. The ex-soldier, as Sarah instinctively labeled him, grunted, his voice low and gravelly. "Prank? This ain't no prank, doll." He scanned the room with a practiced eye, his gaze lingering on the doctor before settling on the locked door. A metallic glint caught the corner of his eye, a glint that seemed to writhe and pulse in the sterile light. His voice dropped to a whisper, sending shivers down Sarah's spine. "They haven't just locked us in, have they?" He gestured to the glint on the door. "They've welded it shut." The air crackled with a new wave of terror. They weren't just trapped in a game with unknown rules. They were trapped in a tomb built of steel, a tomb echoing with the disembodied voice of a faceless entity promising rewards and hinting at an unimaginable punishment for failure. Chapter 2. Uneasy Alliance. The sterile conference room, once sterile to the point of eerie, now thrummed with a frantic energy. Forced cooperation had bred a tense camaraderie. Dr. Evans, the jaded doctor with a neatly trimmed beard and a cynicism etched around his eyes, surveyed the room. "All right, people," he began, his voice surprisingly steady for someone with a clear case of the shakes. "We need a plan." Across from him, Sarah, a freelance writer with a knack for picking bad dates, found herself nodding in agreement. Plan for what, exactly? Escape? Or just surviving the next challenge this creepy voice throws at us? Their unlikely team consisted of Alex, the tech whiz with a perpetual frown and a phone that inexplicably refused to connect to anything, even the non-existent network; John, the ex-soldier with a stoic demeanor and a gaze that seemed to pierce walls; and Harold, the timid librarian whose owlish glasses barely contained the fear bubbling beneath the surface. John, ever the pragmatist, cleared his throat. "Escape first, obviously. But for now, let's figure out this puzzle." He gestured to the imposing metal contraption that had materialized in the center of the table since they'd awakened in this sterile nightmare. It resembled a child's Rubik's Cube, except instead of colored squares, it had complex geometric shapes etched onto its metallic surface. Alex, his frown deepening, tapped the cube with a single finger. "Looks technological, for sure. But the tech here, it's advanced," he muttered under his breath, running his fingers across a glowing panel on the side. Harold, usually quiet, piped up, his voice barely a whisper. "Maybe the answer's in the poster?" He pointed to the motivational monstrosity on the wall. Sarah rolled her eyes. "Really? Teamwork makes the dream work. That our big clue?" But John's brow furrowed. He stepped closer to the poster, his gaze lingering on the stick figures. "Wait a minute," he pointed at one figure holding a wrench. "Look, it's holding this out like a tool." He glanced at the metal cube and then back at the poster, a flicker of understanding dawning in his eyes. A tense few minutes followed as they worked together, each utilizing their own strengths. John's methodical approach, Sarah's sharp observations, Alex's tech knowledge, and even Harold's keen eye for detail all played a part. Finally, with a satisfying click, the cube rotated, revealing a hidden compartment within. Inside, nestled on a bed of red velvet, lay a single playing card, the ace of spades. A wave of relief washed over Sarah, quickly followed by a fresh wave of apprehension. "So, we win this one," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's next?" As if on cue, the disembodied voice boomed through the speakers, its synthetic tones devoid of any emotion. "Congratulations, participants. You have successfully completed the first challenge. Your reward knowledge of your progress. However, time is of the essence. The second challenge awaits. Failure will result in consequences." The voice cut out, plunging the room back into an unsettling silence. The red velvet lining of the compartment, holding the ace of spades, pulsed with a faint, ominous glow. "Consequences, huh?" Dr. Evans muttered, his voice laced with trepidation. A sense of desperate hope had flickered briefly, but was quickly extinguished by the voice's chilling words. They were pawns in a twisted game, and the rules were being rewritten as they played. Just then, John, his eyes fixed on the glowing compartment, let out a strangled gasp. "There's something else," he rasped, pointing at a tiny inscription hidden beneath the velvet. Sarah squinted, leaning closer. The inscription read, "First ace, 7 to follow." Their uneasy alliance had just secured a small victory, but it was a victory tainted by the chilling knowledge that this was just the beginning. Suddenly, a high-pitched whirring filled the room. A hidden camera, cleverly disguised as a smoke detector on the ceiling, word to life, its red light recording their every move. A cold dread settled over them. There was no escape, not from the challenges, not from the watchful eye of their unseen tormentor. Chapter 3: Fractured Reality. The whirring of the hidden camera sent a jolt of icy fear through Sarah. Their every move was being monitored, their trust further eroded by this unwelcome surveillance. John slammed his fist on the table, his face contorted in anger. "We're being played with. We need to find a way out of here, not play their stupid games." The room pulsed with a tense silence. Harold, his face pale under the harsh light, shrank back in his chair, clutching his book bag tighter. Dr. Evans, his lips pressed into a thin line, scanned the room, his gaze lingering on the glowing cube and the inscription within. "This whole place is a trap," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "But there has to be a way out. A hidden escape route, maybe." Alex, however, seemed lost in thought, his fingers tapping a frantic rhythm against the table. "There's something off about the voice," he mumbled, his voice strained. "It's glitching." He pulled out his phone, the same one that had stubbornly refused any connection before. Now, however, the screen flickered to life, displaying lines of distorted code interspersed with cryptic messages that flickered on and off like dying fireflies. "What's that?" John leaned in, his eyes narrowed. "I don't know," Alex admitted, a tremor in his voice. "It's like the system's fighting back. But these messages, they're talking about fear?" Just then, the lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged the room into darkness. A collective gasp filled the air. Panic surged through Sarah, her heart hammering against her ribs. She fumbled for her phone, desperately seeking any sliver of light, but it remained frustratingly dark. A blood-curdling scream pierced the darkness, sending shivers down Sarah's spine. It was Harold, his voice choked with terror. "Don't leave me. Please," he cried, his voice fading into a whimper. "Harold, what's wrong?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling. But there was no answer, only the sound of ragged breaths and muffled sobs. Each of them, it seemed, was trapped in their own personal nightmare. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the sounds of terror and despair that filled the room. When she dared to open them again, a horrifying image swam into view in the darkness. A skeletal figure with glowing red eyes leered at her from the corner, its bony fingers beckoning. She choked back a scream, scrambling away from the apparition. Was it real, or a figment of her own fear? It didn't matter. The terror was paralyzing, real enough to make her whimper in the darkness. A distorted voice, once authoritative, now crackled with a malevolent glee, filled the room. "Welcome to your deepest nightmares, participants," it rasped. "The game has changed. Escape is no longer an option. Now, face your fears and each other." The darkness pulsed with a malevolent energy, twisting and warping reality around them. The line between this horrifying reality and their deepest fears had blurred, leaving them alone with the monsters lurking in the shadows of their minds. The uneasy alliance they'd forged seemed to crumble under the weight of their own terror. Fear and suspicion threatened to tear them apart, leaving them vulnerable to whatever horrors awaited them in the darkness. Chapter 4: Echoes in the Dark. The darkness lingered, a heavy cloak suffocating sound and reason. Sarah stumbled back, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The skeletal figure with glowing eyes was gone, replaced by an unsettling silence broken only by the ragged gasps of their companions. "John, Alex, Harold," her voice, a mere whisper in the inky blackness, echoed back distorted and hollow. Panic clawed at her throat. Were they still there? Had the darkness claimed them like phantoms in the night? A choked sob escaped her lips, the sound harsh and unfamiliar in the suffocating silence. A cold hand clamped over her shoulder, sending a jolt of terror through her. She spun around, ready to scream, but found herself face to face with John. His normally stoic face was pale and drawn, his eyes wide with a raw fear she'd never seen before. "Sarah," he rasped, his voice rough. "We need to get out of here." His words were a lifeline, a spark of hope in the suffocating darkness. Together, they stumbled towards the conference table, their hands brushing in the gloom. Harold, huddled beneath the table, let out a whimper as they walked past. "I saw it too," he whispered, his voice shaking. "A giant spider with eyes like burning embers." John knelt beside him, offering a hand. "There's no spider, Harold. It's just the darkness messing with your head." But even as he spoke, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. How could you be sure what was real and what was hallucination in this twisted game? A low moan echoed through the room, seemingly emanating from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was a sound of pure despair, of unimaginable anguish that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. "Alex," she ventured, her voice barely a whisper. No answer came, only the unsettling moan that seemed to intensify with each passing second. Suddenly, Harold gasped, pointing a trembling finger towards the wall. "Look there." Scrawled across the previously pristine white wall, seemingly etched with an invisible hand, were strange symbols. They resembled a chaotic mix of ancient runes and futuristic glyphs pulsing with an eerie luminescence. Dr. Evans, who had been strangely silent throughout the ordeal, approached the wall, his eyes narrowed in concentration. These are symbols from a forgotten language," he muttered, tracing the symbols with his finger. "An obscure dialect used by a civilization obsessed with fear." His words sent a fresh wave of dread through Sarah. Fear. It was all a twisted experiment in fear. But what was the deeper purpose? What were they learning from their terror? As Sarah pondered these questions, a sudden thump from the corner of the room sent a jolt through them. They all turned towards the source of the sound, but the darkness seemed to swallow it whole. "John," Sarah ventured, fear tightening her voice. "Did you hear that?" John's eyes scanned the darkness, his hand hovering near his belt buckle, where a weapon might have been strapped before this nightmare began. "Stay close," he rasped. But before he could move further, a scream pierced the darkness. A high-pitched, desperate scream that sent chills down their spines. It was Alex's voice, filled with a raw terror that echoed a primal fear. Then, silence. A heavy, oppressive silence that settled over the room like a shroud. Sarah called out Alex's name, her voice trembling, but there was no answer. He was gone, just like that, vanished into the darkness without a trace. The unsettling whispers seemed to intensify, swirling around them like a malevolent fog. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was a fight for survival. And Sarah wasn't sure how long they would hold on in this ever-shifting labyrinth of fear. Chapter 5. Glitch in Game. The darkness that had swallowed Alex hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of their precarious situation. John, his face etched with grim determination, switched on his lighter, its flickering flame casting grotesque shadows that danced on the walls. "We need a plan," he said, his voice low and steady. "Staying huddled in the dark won't help us." Sarah forced herself to nod, her voice thick with despair. "But what kind of plan?" "They're toying with us, playing with our minds." A flicker of movement on the table caught her eye. Harold, his face pale and drawn, was holding a scrap of paper torn from the corner of the table. Scrawled on it, in shaky handwriting, were the symbols they'd seen on the wall. "Maybe there's a pattern," he mumbled. Dr. Evans, who had been staring intently at the flickering lighter flame, perked up. "An escape pattern? Perhaps." He crouched beside Harold, his eyes scanning the symbols. "These markings, they might be a key." Suddenly, a harsh metallic clang echoed through the room. A new fixture had materialized on the conference table, a sleek, black box with a single red button pulsing ominously in the center. A wave of nausea washed over Sarah as she noticed the faint glow of a timer counting down from 60 seconds. "What is that?" John demanded, his hand instinctively reaching for his belt buckle, the empty space a stark reminder of their helplessness. The disembodied voice, stripped of its former synthetic sheen and now laced with a cruel amusement, boomed through the speakers. "Welcome back, participants. The game resumes. This is a test of your reflexes. Failure to press the button within the allotted time will have consequences." The timer ticked down, each second a hammer blow to Sarah's already frayed nerves. Panic surged through her, threatening to consume her. But then, amidst the chaos, Alex's voice, distorted and glitching like a broken recording, echoed in the room. "Don't press it," it rasped. "It's a trap." Sarah's mind raced. Alex, but he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Just then, a figure emerged from the shadows. Alex, thinner, his clothes tattered, his eyes filled with a desperate urgency. He stumbled towards them, gasping for breath. I was trapped," he stammered, his voice raspy. "But I found a way out. A glitch in the system." He pointed at the black box, his voice shaking with exertion. "Don't press it. It's a test, but not a reflex one. It measures fear. The button triggers a punishment." Relief washed over Sarah, a fragile wave in the sea of terror. They had a chance, but it was a slim one. Alex's reappearance, his explanation of the glitch, it all pointed to a weakness in the system, a chink in the armor of their unseen tormentor. A new resolve hardened Sarah's resolve. Fear was a weapon they could turn against their captors. They needed to exploit the glitches, manipulate the simulation, and find a way to shut it down. John spoke, his voice firm. "All right, we have a plan. Alex, tell us everything about the glitch. Harold, keep studying those symbols. Dr. Evans, look for any weaknesses in the room's construction. And Sarah," he met her gaze, a spark of determination flickering in his eyes. "We find this control panel." The red button pulsed, the timer ticking down relentlessly. But for the first time since they'd awakened in this sterile nightmare, they fought back. They were no longer pawns, but players in a twisted game. They would find the master control panel. They would exploit the system's weaknesses. They would survive. As Sarah scrambled towards the wall, searching for a hidden door, a tremor shook the room. A heavy metal door clanged open at the far end, revealing a dark and foreboding chamber filled with flickering monitors displaying disturbing images that sent a fresh wave of terror through her. Had they found a way out, or stumbled upon a new horror altogether? Chapter 6. The Architect Revealed. The harsh metallic clang of the opening door echoed through the room, a jarring counterpoint to the frantic whispers and the red button's ominous pulse. Sarah, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, cautiously stepped into the newly revealed chamber. A stale, metallic tang filled her nostrils, and the flickering light from the monitors revealed a scene ripped from a dystopian nightmare. Cables snaked across the floor like metallic serpents, and rows upon rows of blinking lights filled the room with an unsettling hum. In the center, hunched over a massive control panel that pulsed with an otherworldly glow, sat a figure. He was a gaunt man, his clothes hanging loosely on his emaciated frame. Wild, unkempt hair framed a face etched with exhaustion and despair. As they approached, he turned, his bloodshot eyes widening in surprise. You shouldn't be here," he stammered, his voice hoarse and laced with a thick foreign accent. John stepped forward, his hand instinctively hovering near his empty belt buckle. "Who are you? And what is this place?" The man took a deep, shaky breath. I'm Dr. Dmitry Antonov. They call me the architect." He gestured towards the control panel, its complex network of buttons and glowing displays, a stark contrast to the sterile conference room. This is the heart of the simulation. Sarah's mind reeled. A simulation? Was this all some elaborate mind game? But the terror they'd experienced, the chilling whispers in the darkness, it all felt too real. Dr. Antonov seemed to read the doubt in her eyes. "I know it seems impossible," he rasped. "But trust me, it's all a program. A twisted experiment designed to study human behavior under extreme duress." He explained how he, a brilliant tech genius, ostracized for his radical theories on fear and its primal hold on humanity, had been coerced into creating this simulation for a shadowy entity known only as the Overseer. "They hold my family hostage," he confessed, his voice cracking with emotion. "They promised their safety in exchange for my expertise." A wave of conflicting emotions washed over Sarah. Pity for this broken man, a chilling understanding of the experiment's horrifying purpose, and a gnawing suspicion. Could they trust this desperate architect? Or was this all part of a more elaborate scheme? Dr. Antonov, sensing their hesitation, pressed on. "I can help you escape this nightmare," he pleaded. "But I need your help to shut down the simulation. The Overseer is too powerful, but together, maybe we can find a way." The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. Continue their escape attempt, a desperate gamble with unknown odds, or trust this stranger, a potential ally or a cunning manipulator. The flickering monitors cast grotesque shadows on the wall, a constant reminder of the horrors they'd endured. John glanced at Sarah, his eyes a deep blue pool reflecting the uncertainty they all shared. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah knew the answer, held the key to their survival, and perhaps the fate of Dr. Antonov's family. In that sterile chamber, bathed in the eerie glow of the simulation's core, they were forced to make a choice, a decision that would determine if they remained captive to their fear or finally break free from the clutches of this twisted game. Chapter 7. Breaking the Simulation. Dr. Antonov's words hung heavy in the air, a desperate plea laced with a chilling uncertainty. To trust him was a gamble, but the alternative, remaining trapped in this twisted simulation, was unthinkable. John, ever pragmatic, broke the silence. "All right, architect. Show us what we need to do." A flicker of hope, fragile yet persistent, lit up Dr. Antonov's eyes. He gestured toward the control panel, its pulsating glow and intimidating welcome. "The Overseer monitors everything. But there are blind spots, glitches in the system Alex exploited. We need to use them to our advantage." His explanation was technical, a whirlwind of firewalls, access codes, and core protocols. But one thing was clear: their escape hinged on disrupting the simulation from within. Alex, his initial bravado replaced by a steely focus, stepped forward. "I can manipulate the code, create glitches that might mask our movements, confuse the system." John, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon that wasn't there, nodded grimly. "Good. I'll handle any defenses the simulation throws at us." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for their unlikely team. Each brought a unique skill set to the table, a glimmer of hope against the overwhelming power of the overseer. Dr. Antonov led them through the chamber's labyrinthine corridors, his voice a hushed whisper guiding them through the maze of cables and blinking lights. The air crackled with a tangible tension, the silence broken only by the rhythmic hum of the machinery and the pounding of their own hearts. Suddenly, a holographic image materialized in front of Sarah, a distorted reflection of her childhood home, ravaged by flames. A scream tore from her throat as a spectral figure emerged from the inferno, its burning eyes accusing. It was a manifestation of her deepest fear, a childhood trauma the simulation had dredged up to exploit. John, recognizing the danger, grabbed her arm, his voice sharp and clear. "It's not real, Sarah. Focus." His words, a lifeline in the storm of her terror, snapped her out of the hallucination. Just then, a metallic clang echoed throughout the chamber. Metal bars slammed shut, trapping them in a confined space. From the darkness, robotic figures materialized, their cold, emotionless eyes locked on them. "Simulation defense protocols activated," Dr. Antonov rasped, his voice laced with panic. Alex, his fingers flying across a portable keyboard he'd somehow managed to smuggle in, yelled out, "I'm overloading the system." "It might create an opening, but it won't last long." A wave of dizziness washed over Sarah as the chamber pulsed with an unnatural light. The robotic figures faltered, their movements jerky and erratic. John, ever the soldier, used the momentary confusion to his advantage, disarming one of the robots with a swift, practiced move. They sprinted towards the control panel, a beacon of their desperate hope amidst the chaos. Dr. Antonov, his face etched with concentration, began deciphering the complex network of glowing wires and cryptic symbols. "There," he exclaimed, pointing to a series of glowing red buttons. "A system override. But I need time to decipher the sequence." John and Alex formed a human shield around him, fending off the malfunctioning robots whose metallic cries echoed in the chamber. Sarah watched, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach, as Dr. Antonov's hands flew across the control panel. A frantic dance against time and their unseen tormentor. The simulation flickered, reality blurring around the edges. Was it working? Were they close to breaking free? Or was this just another cruel twist by the overseer? The answer hung in the balance, as fragile as the hope flickering in their eyes. Chapter 8. Escape or Annihilation. The simulation sputtered and lurched, a chaotic reflection of their desperate struggle. Dr. Antonov's brow furrowed in concentration as his fingers danced across the control panel. "I found it," he shouted over the cacophony of malfunctioning robots and the insistent hum of the machinery. "The system shutdown sequence." A flicker of hope ignited in Sarah's chest, a fragile flame threatened to be extinguished by the ever-present fear. But before they could celebrate, a distorted voice, laced with a cold fury, boomed through the chamber. "Intriguing," it rasped. "You've reached the final stage. However, freedom comes at a price." The robots, momentarily subdued by Alex's code overload, lurched back to life, their metallic limbs moving with renewed ferocity. But this wasn't the final challenge. A holographic display flickered to life above the control panel, revealing a harrowing scene. It was a twisted reflection of their deepest fears, a nightmarish amalgamation of their individual anxieties. For Sarah, it was a raging inferno engulfing a crowded hospital room. For John, it was a battlefield littered with fallen comrades. For Alex, it was a sea of mocking code, an endless loop of errors and failures. "This is your ultimate test," the voice echoed. "Face your fears, or face oblivion." Panic threatened to consume Sarah. the acrid smell of smoke stinging her nostrils in her mind's eye. But John's voice, a steady anchor in the storm, cut through her terror. "We can do this," he said, his voice firm. "We just have to work together. Sarah, focus on the override sequence. Alex, keep overloading the system. I'll take care of the bots." With a newfound resolve, Sarah forced her gaze away from the horrifying scene and back to the control panel. Her hands trembled as she followed Dr. Antonov's frantic instructions, memorizing the complex sequence of button presses. A brutal fight ensued. John, drawing on his combat training, disarmed the robots with practiced moves, each blow fueled by a desperate need to protect his newfound team. Alex, his face a mask of concentration, hammered away at his keyboard, unleashing a torrent of code that disrupted the simulation's core. Sweat beaded on Sarah's forehead as she reached the final button. This was it. The point of no return. A single wrong move could spell disaster, but the thought of remaining trapped in this nightmare was even more terrifying. With a deep breath, she slammed her finger down on the glowing red button. The room pulsed with a blinding light, the control panel sputtering and spewing sparks. The robots froze mid-motion, the holographic display flickering and fading into darkness. Silence, a heavy, oppressive silence that hung in the air thicker than the metallic tang that filled the room. Had they done it? Were they free? Slowly, the flickering lights sputtered back to life, revealing the sterile conference room devoid of the horrifying apparatus. They looked at each other, faces etched with exhaustion and a sliver of hope. But as Sarah reached out to touch the cool surface of the conference table, a cold, metallic laugh echoed through the room. The disembodied voice, now distorted and laced with a hint of amusement, spoke once more. "Congratulations," it rasped. "You've passed the first test. Welcome to level 2. The room dissolved around them, replaced by a swirling vortex of colors and sensations. Their screams were swallowed whole by the deafening silence as they were pulled deeper into the unknown, leaving the reader to wonder, was this escape or just another horrifying layer of the simulation's twisted game? A blinding light filled Sarah's vision as she blinked her eyes open. The sterile conference room, the motivational poster, it was all there. But this time, a wave of relief washed over her. John, Harold, Alex, they were all there too, blinking in the harsh fluorescent lights. A message on Alex's phone, a victory message, confirmed their escape. The fear experiment was over. They had each other and the memory of their shared courage. Stepping out into the sunlight, they took a deep breath, the taste of freedom sweet on their tongues. The future stretched before them, a blank page waiting to be filled, this time with stories of their own choosing.